Hello and welcome to Science Never Stops. I'm your host, Joseph Vick with the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, here today with NASA Marshall Space Flight Center guest, astrophysicist Dr. Stephen Ehlert. Welcome, Dr. Ehlert, to Science Never Stops.
All right, it's great to be here. Hello.
So let's start off. Could you please explain to our viewers what your field of study is and tell us about some current NASA projects you're working on?
Sure. So I am an astrophysicist, and basically what an astrophysicist does is they research what sort of physical processes operate within objects that you can observe in the solar system or the galaxy or even beyond our galaxy. So it's a lot of research, and this research can be done a lot of different ways. So there are astrophysicists who do a lot of work with just pen and paper, where they just write out equations and do math. There are other astrophysicists who observe objects out in space with telescopes of all different shapes and sizes. There are other astrophysicists who spend all their time programming computers and doing simulations of everything from the planet to the solar system to the entire universe. And there are other astrophysicists who dedicate a lot of their time to building instruments, building detectors, and building equipment that actually helps make these measurements. And all of these groups work together, and they just hope to make the universe and all the objects in it a little bit less mysterious and a little bit more interesting to the general public.
And you specifically, as an astrophysicist, you work with Chandra, the Great Observatory, correct?
Yes, so my background has a lot of X-ray astronomy in it, so I do a lot of observations of the universe with X-ray telescopes. Chandra is one of those, and one of the ones I work with the most these days, which is a really special telescope in the X-ray community. It was launched more than 20 years ago, and it's continuing to do groundbreaking science every day, and it's still collecting data, and it's still beaming it down from space. It's in space just like Hubble, and it's beaming it down every day. And what's really cool about this particular mission is it gives really, really sharp images. It gives you the sharpest images you can get in the X-rays from any telescope that we have. And some of these mirrors that were made in order to produce these images are some of the smoothest surfaces that have ever been fabricated. They're so well polished, and they're so smooth, and they're so perfectly formed to their intended shape that you can actually see things at sort of 10 times sharper than you can with any other telescope, or any other X-ray telescope, of course.
Okay, so with X-rays, what is the significance of using X-ray technology with a great observatory?
So every different kind of light tells you something different about the objects you're investigating. So for many reasons, we're interested in observing objects across every type of radiation we can muster. So we observe objects with the radio, we observe them with optical light, the same light we see with our eyes, we observe them with X-rays. And each of these gives you some different insights as to what's going on in the system overall. And X-ray astronomy is really good for, what I will say are sort of hot and violent phenomena. So you'll see if you have something that's at really, really hot temperatures, even hotter than the surface of the sun, they frequently will shine in X-rays. Or if you see a big explosion, explosion out in space, oftentimes that will have a lot of X-rays, associated with that event. So by looking at the X-rays, especially when you combine it with information at other wavelengths or at other energies, it gives you a nice complete picture as to what the object is doing.
And in science, explosions are the best part.
So yeah.
Why? Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about your educational background and how that helped you obtain your current NASA position?
So yeah, so I have a PhD. I received my PhD in 2013, and there's lots of work you can do in astronomy and astrophysics without having a PhD. But a PhD is very well suited, and it's in many ways essential to really learn how to do research, how to find new objects, how to conduct new tests, how to do the necessary calculations to figure out what's going on out in space. So a lot of the time in a PhD is spent learning what we know already about a very particular class of object or a very narrow field. And then you're also trained in how to figure out, you're learning how that was determined, how we know that, not just what we know, but how we know it and why we know it. And then figuring out how to go past that, how to figure out what the next step is. What do we need to figure out? How can we improve on what we know? What's the most interesting or relevant thing to try and figure out, not just for the problem at hand, but for other problems in general.
What was your doctoral focus? What was your research centered around?
So it was focused around a particular class of objects out in the sky known as galaxy clusters, which, from the name, suggests that there are a lot of galaxies, all sort of in very, very nearby each other, a whole neighborhood of galaxies. And these galaxy clusters, because they're so big, actually are very, very hot, and there's a lot of gas floating around, and that gas is very bright in X-rays. And that gas there's actually more gas than there are galaxies. So you can infer a lot of what's going on in these really big systems that are forming as we speak, and they're all sort of combining at the largest scales of the universe. And you can learn a lot about these particular objects by looking at what the gas is doing. And to look at the gas, you really want to look in the X-rays.
Now, with this, it sounds like you're very passionate with your research and with your focus. Now, growing up, was there any certain class, extracurricular activity, mentor, or experience that helped shape your career path to the sort of passion you have for astrophysics today?
The biggest sort of single point that determined what I got into was when I was an undergraduate, when I was in college. I knew I wanted to study physics. I knew I wanted to do research, but I didn't exactly know where. I didn't know what kind of physics I wanted to do. I didn't know what I was going to find interesting or what I wasn't going to find interesting. And I wanted to get started fairly early, so I started emailing professors and just saying, hey, I'm a freshman in college. I really want to do some of these things. Do you have a spot in your lab? And I emailed a bunch of them, and a couple people told me no, and a couple people didn't, just didn't have the space, and a couple people never responded at all. But, the first yes I got was an X-ray astronomer. And, it had a combination of lab work and data analysis, and I got to spend times on both sides of that, and over the years. And that's what really sort of put me on this path. And I've done a few other things other than X-ray astronomy over the years, but I always ended up coming back to it.
Now, as a scientist, you know that there can be doing experiments, there can be failures and setbacks. What would you say would be your biggest academic or career experiment setback, and how did you overcome it?
So, when I was in my first year of graduate school, I realized I had to step up my game. I had to really, if I really wanted to continue doing this, I had to study a bit harder. It was more work than I was in. It was more hard work than I was certain I needed, so to speak. But you just have to tell yourself, when things get hard, you have to realize what it's going to take, and you have to dedicate to it, and that even if you're self-assured and you're talented, that's not going to make any of those things happen on their own. It's going to take a lot of focus. You're going to have to hit the books, and you're going to have to, you're really going to have to absorb it. But it is very satisfying when it all works and when you finally get it figured out. It's a very, very cool feeling. So,
who would you say would be your favorite scientist and why?
So, I'm a big fan of Isaac Newton. He was basically in his 20s, and he was at Cambridge, and he decided he was going to figure out all of these brand new insights basically into gravity and mechanics and optics. And he spent, a sizable portion of his life just, coming up with all these revolutionary ideas, and in particular developing all sorts of new mathematics, because he had all these great insights that he just needed to be able to figure out how to quantify, and he did. And And he did it all too. He had he had all these great theoretical vision. I don't know if it's even, that are, certainly at the time were just irreplaceable.
Yeah, and I read here recently that he discovered many, many things in the scientific community during what would be the equivalent to a quarantine, because he was, in his house and created in his boredom the calculus and did all kinds of various other optical experiments. So great things, I guess, can come from being in scientific lockdown.
Yeah, he did the experiments too, where he figured out, if it actually did this, if light behaved the way that most people told me it did, then we should be able to test this. And he was able to test it, and he had all these great new ideas that ended up holding up for, they hold up to this day. There's more complications upon them, but still most of those ideas have held up in their original form. I also find it really interesting about him that so he lived to in his 80s, and for the last 30 years of his life, he worked at the Mint, and he worked at the Royal Mint, and he was doing basically he was searching for counterfeiters. That was sort of his job, or that's how. I don't know. Basically, it was one of these fancy royal positions that he wasn't supposed to take seriously, but he did, and he ended up, spending his time, wearing disguises and gathering evidence of counterfeiture and cross-examining witnesses. So,
well, everybody enjoys their retirement in different ways. So,
yes, indeed.
With that sounds like an interesting sort of hobby. Do you happen to have any special abilities or talents or hobbies that might surprise people?
I speak German, I guess. I don't know if that would surprise anybody necessarily, but it's something I was able to pick up. I actually had the opportunity to do a research fellowship in Germany for a year when I graduated from college. So it did. I had high school classes, and I was able to go and live there. That's one of the really nice things about this position is there's lots of, if you like to travel and you like to talk to people from different countries, there's a lot of opportunities to do that in astrophysics. So a lot of the collaborations are international in scale, and a lot of the conferences are international. So you really get to learn a lot about the world, the world we live on, as well as worlds that we don't live on, or as well as places that we don't live.
Yeah, and with Chandra, you get to travel around the whole universe too. So
yes, indeed. You get to do that from your couch, and you get to travel around the world at certain, there are opportunities to do that, and there are opportunities to talk to people from all over the world as well. So
now, you being the current NASA generation, do you happen to have a personal motto or advice to pass along to the next NASA career generation?
I always liked this quote. It's from John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach. He's got a lot of quotes. He's before my time, but he still has a lot of quotes that hold up pretty well. And my favorite one is, it's what you learn after you know it all that really counts. So,
all right, time to express your nerddom. What is your your favorite science fiction franchise? Do you happen to have one in media or Star Wars, Star Trek?
I really liked The Matrix when it came out. I like the Kung Fu movies, and of course that one happened to hit me right when I was about, I think I was in 8th or 9th grade when that one came out. So it was just like that one was just sort of like, I'd never seen a movie like it at the time, and I just thought it was super cool.
Red pill or blue pill?
Oh.
Would you go into the Matrix? Would you yourself take part?
Oh yeah, especially if I get the if I can get the whole uplink thing, where I can learn how to fly a helicopter in 45 seconds.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add or say for the viewers?
What I'll say is that NASA always is looking for people who have grand ideas, whether it's how to design a rocket ship or how to build a spacecraft or how to do science. You should, if those are the sorts of things you're interested in doing, NASA's always looking for people, and you should pursue them, because even if you don't end up doing science professionally, what you learn from doing science, or what you learn from doing these, the science and engineering jobs, can be applied to so many places in ways you would never even dream of. I think there's lots and lots of science that, that the science we do often has lots of, really profound uses for mankind at large, even beyond just the knowledge. So what it takes to, learning what it takes to build a telescope, or learning what it takes to design a rocket, or learning learning how to analyze telescope data. A lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues who aren't working in science anymore, they're still doing great things. And it's exactly those same skills that, their employers were looking for, and that the people were looking for in order to make the world a better place.
Great. Now,
so don't be afraid to pursue it, even if it's not something, if you don't want it to be your day job. So
for our viewers that may be interested, where could they go to learn a little bit more about the Chandra missions?
So the Chandra page would be at Chandra, CHANDRA.harvard.edu. That's probably the best place to look for that's where you see all the pretty pictures. That's where you see all of the educational materials. That's where you can learn many of the technical specs there. There are other places to learn the technical specs, all of which I think are linked to Chandra.harvard.edu. So that would be the first place that I would suggest people go if they want to learn more about the Chandra Great Observatory, X-ray astronomy, and what sort of images we're making, and what sort of objects are being observed with the telescope.
Great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Ehlert, for joining us today. And for all of our viewers joining us, always remember, science never stops.